Everybody, my name is Paul, and here's another of my series of helpful information for buying and selling property in Virginia, especially rural property. I'm a licensed realtor in the state of Virginia, and I live up near Lexington, Virginia. And I travel around quite a bit in the western part of the state, especially the Blue Ridge Mountains and that area. Now, I'm going to use an example here of a personal search, but I want to talk a little bit about evaluating property in the rural areas, because a lot of people I've noticed are moving out into the countryside. Maybe they're done with city life, they're retiring like myself, and they want a little slower pace of life. Or young people wanting to raise a family in a nice rural area and get away from the stressful suburbs and expensive. So when you come out into the rural area, anytime you buy property anywhere, basically there's what we call a comparative market analysis. And there's a saying in real estate that a property is worth what a ready, willing, and able buyer will pay at that particular time in that particular area. So the same property can be seen differently by different people, and they have their own ideas about it. There are certain calculations you can make about how much it costs to build a structure or something, or fix a home. But in a rural property, there's very few comparables that are exactly. An example I'm going to give you is a property that has 20 acres. And it is a combination of agricultural zoning and it's residential. It's got two homes on it. One is just a mobile home. Now, when we go and evaluate a property, if we want to be that buyer that is the ready, willing, and able, we have to determine for ourselves what we're going to pay for the property, what we're willing to pay, and we may have to make some compromises along the way. And if someone is really fixated on a certain price, we have to decide whether that extra price, whether it's $10,000 or $15,000 more than you want to pay, whether you can see something in the property that has extra value, some special advantage that you have that you say, okay, for example, let's say it's fencing. Maybe a lot of people buying a piece of property aren't into horses, and they don't really care that much if there happens to be fencing along certain areas, or maybe a pasture is fenced. But someone who's a horse enthusiast, we're going to say, well, that's really nice to have that fencing right there. I won't even have to make it, and my horse can go right in there. And they'll see that as an advantage because they have horses, and that's their perspective. And someone who just wants a house to live in and a big yard, they don't want to mow that, so they might even think of it as a nuisance to have all that land. See? So what we have to determine as a buyer is exactly what we want, and it's almost impossible to find exactly what our dream property is going to be. You see, there's only so many types of property. Let's say you want to say, okay, I want it to be under 400,000, over at least 10 acres, and I want a water feature on it, either a stream or a pond, and so on and so forth. Maybe you want a storage building or a garage or something. So you can have some specifications, but you may not find everything that you want. And the more narrow that you search, the more specifications that you have, the search is going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. And at some point, for example, you might find a great property, but it's 3 hours away and you don't want to live there in some boony town. You see, so you might have to compromise on the price, you might have to compromise on the size of the land. You might have to determine in your own mind what you're willing to put into something. And when you think in the long term, let's say a property, like I said, a guy was fixated on a certain price, and the seller says, okay, I want 300,000, no negotiation. And you're thinking, okay, man, I really wish I could get it for 290, right? Well, over 30 years or a lifetime of owning it, or maybe passing it to your heirs, that $10,000 is going to look like a very small amount of money, especially if you bring value to the property yourself. And then it just increases over time with equity. $10,000 on a $300,000 property, it's not really that much if you think about it. So think carefully about nickel and diming when you find something you really want. If you find a property you really just love, and it just happens to be just a little higher than you wanted to pay, say, where are you going to find another one? Are you going to look and look and look and look and find something just like that with $20,000 cheaper? Good luck. See? So our own perception of what we want and desire and need and definitely don't want on a piece of property that we buy, we have to be really clear about that ourselves, and then amass our resources and so on. Now, in this particular property, let's say I'm using an example of someone wants to flip the property. So they find something in the property that is, what a really common thing out in this part of the woods here in Virginia is you find properties with old cars and junk and refrigerators and tractors and stuff sitting on the property. And maybe it's a really sweet piece of property with views and timber and nice fields and a stream nearby or something like that, but it has this junk on the property. Now, that's a situation where when you make an offer on a property, you just put in the contingencies that either all that junk is gone or there's no deal. You see, so there's ways that you can get around something like that where you don't have to buy a property that has that junk on it. You just say, okay, I will buy it at X price, but here's my specifications, you see. Now, there's a lot of people who would look at a property like that, and I've looked at some like that, believe me, and they just start like, don't even want to go there, the realtors don't want to show it, and so on, because it's just too much of an eyesore. Now, there's a lot of homes out there that look nice on the outside, but you walk on the inside, it'll scare you sometimes. Stuff that's in there, and I looked at one the other day like, okay, I've seen enough. Walk into the kitchen, okay, I'm out of here, you know. So if you see such a property where, let's say you happen to be in the cleaning business and you have a whole bunch of pals who think, okay, we'll do this, and we'll demolish something, and if you have assistants and allies on your side when you look at a property, you can look at the defects of the property and say, I can deal with that, I can fix that fence, I can put up a new gate or whatever, I can, you know, refinish the basement or whatever. You know, there's things that people can do. And a lot of times people who buy property in the country, they have these skills, or maybe they have a friend in the business, or maybe when there's a carpenter in the family, or another plumber in the family, an electrician in the family. If you got a family like that, you can go to it. But there's certain things that you want to look for when you go evaluate a home. And again, we're talking a little bit about price, okay? But if it has a sagging roof and a bad roof, you're talking about some serious stuff. Doesn't mean you shouldn't buy it, because people do buy it, and they say, well, if the margin is good enough, you get it cheap enough, and they got all the pals who are contractors, they can fix the roof in a couple of weeks, or whatever. But most of the time, people don't have that level of skills for fixing foundations or fixing a roof or something like that, or a septic system. However, there are people in the countryside that will say, hey, I got a bulldozer, I can fix that septic for you, and they'll charge you, you know, $1,000 or whatever, and dig a hole or fix whatever they got to do, drainage and stuff. So there are there are remedies for certain problems that you might see, but they may cost something, but not necessarily as much as you think, because there are a lot of homes that have just been lived in for 30 years, and there's really nothing technically wrong with them. They all function and everything, but it's just cosmetically out of date. Well, you can go into a home like that, and you can just clean everything really nice, and maybe, you know, you can get these new tub installations and just slap them in there and all that, brand new and everything. It costs $500 or whatever. You spend a couple of weekends working on your bathrooms, you upgrade the kitchen a little bit, you put some nice colorful paint on the walls, you clean all the garbage off the electrical, you know, where people turn on the light switches, it tends to get really dirty. You can just clean up the place, put some new curtains and drapes on, clean the windows, stuff like that, clean the gutters, plant some shrubs around the property, stuff like that you can do and make a huge difference in the property. So again, we're talking about evaluating a property in a homestead type of situation or real property. You have to have a palette of skills, you might say, or things that you bring to the table to any property. That's how you can get a really good deal, for example, by having some way that you can save a lot of money, or maybe you can sell some firewood and make a few $1,000s that way, or all kinds of stuff like that you can do. Now, there's a rough calculation about the size of a house, and it's very, very general, so don't fixate on this particular number. But let's say you take a 1,000 square foot house. How much would it cost to build that house today, that square foot? Now, on the lower end, I looked at it recently in my area, Lexington, Virginia. I think it was a couple of years ago. I saw the average was $129 a square foot. Now, that was before COVID and the prices went up on lumber and stuff. Now, you can get high-end cost of a house that you can pay hundreds of dollars a square foot if you put marble everywhere and tile and this and that. But typically, you're probably looking at under $200 a square foot for your basic construction. I'm not a contractor, but you can check this figure. I look at a lot of homes and I see kind of like how they're evaluated a little bit. And if you find a house that's for sale that's under $100 a square foot, now you have to include the lot. Now again, this is an interesting calculation, bear with me here. If you find a house on a basic lot in the countryside is maybe 2 acres. That's a minimum property size for a home residence in the countryside in many areas. You hardly ever see the 1 acre zoning and small type zoning except in the towns. So you figure any house that's decent, let's say you got a 1,000 square foot house, you got a 2 acre lot, you got a septic and a well, you got the electric connected, and it's in decent shape. How much would that piece of property be worth? If you multiply by 130 per square foot just for the house, you add the acreage a little bit for the building lot, say 2 acres, and call it $20,000 or something. Add the septic and well, and you got a number. So let's say you have a number about $150,000 for a real basic house of 1,000 square feet. Just use that as a ballpark. Now you calculate that if you find a home that is underpriced per market value in terms of square footage, and you can paint the walls and do some cosmetic stuff and put some shrubs in and add value, that's going to have a big impact on the total square foot per square foot value of your home. So if you have a 1,000 square foot house and you value it at $130,000 plus the septic and well, you got $150,000. Figure the house with some improvements could be worth $150,000 plus the land. You see, so think about the long-term value. If you hold a property for several years and just enjoy it and slowly upgrade it, a little bit by a little bit, every year, keep track of your expenses, do the capital gains thing and the taxes and everything at the end of the year. After some years, you're probably going to get some equity in a house. If you want to flip a house, you need to have a big margin, you see. And that means that you're going to have to add something, probably some cost of some kind, and some labor from sweat equity to get that margin, because it's very unlikely that you're going to buy a house that's already flipped. Let's say somebody already flipped it, it's $150,000, and they did a lot of work and they got their $20,000 in margin in it. No, it's hard for you to buy that property at $150,000 and in 1 year make it to $185,000 or something, because it's already been flipped, it's already been upgraded, and maybe you can do a few things in the yard and paint the walls a little bit. Besides white, you can add a little color or whatever, but you're not going to get a huge margin in 1 year from a typical standard suburban house that's already been flipped. You might get that when you find somebody who's been living there for a long time and then they finally move out, and then you can go in there and do all the stuff and the cosmetics, and then you can make a good margin, because the house will sell, not present very well when it sells, and when you put all the cosmetics in it, it will present very well. But a lot of flipped houses are out there on the market, and you'll see them, they're all staged, they'll put the little towel in the right place and pose it everywhere, and they just paint the walls white or gray, whatever, and it's all standard, okay? Most flippers do not put a lot of high-end materials into a flipped house. But however, you buy a house and you upgrade it yourself, not with the intention of flipping, you can make that house into something really extraordinary over the time that you live there. If you buy a house that's, like I said, lived in for a while and needs a lot of cosmetics, but while you live there, you put your own equity in, and after a number of years, the ordinary valuation keeps going up slowly with the market and everything. But then in addition, all your personal touches on a property can make an extraordinary value, especially if you do a custom bathroom with tile and all that stuff. So I want people to help help people understand about evaluating property, because it's very subjective, especially in the countryside. And when you go on Zillow and these sites and everything and say, okay, what's the value of my property? And you just do a little clicking and they go, no, don't go by those numbers, because they're totally artificial and just estimated and all that. A property that you desire and want, you have to see what the value is. If you're lucky, you'll buy on the low end and see some potential in it, and then you'll add the value yourself and increase the equity. But when you look on these sites and find out an average value of a house, it's very deceptive, because sometimes valuating a property was within 5 or 6 miles of where the subject property is. And when you see on Zillow the average house sale in this area, they're just calculating on based on like some raw numbers and people guessing and what's listing for sale and what's on market and all that stuff. It's not really a good calculator, because markets shift very fast, sometimes very quickly. Like recently this year, we had a bunch of interest rates changes. Well, boy, all of a sudden the prices start coming down, because people are like, well, I was hoping to get my 250, but people can't afford that or whatever, so I got to reduce the price to 240 because they're paying more per month on their mortgage. So markets do shift, and the season in the springtime, there's a lot of buyers out there. There's a cycle with the schools. If you're buying a family home, a lot of them like to close by 1st of September. So there's a big rush in the spring to go, hey, honey, we're going to buy a new house and move to California or whatever. And they hurry up and buy a house, and they just close on it quickly so they can get their kids into school. See, that kind of stuff happens too. But if you buy off-peak market, like in the wintertime or way before it's spring, sometimes you can get those, okay, the seller's saying, okay, I'm just tired, like, okay, let's just sell it, whatever, I'm tired of holding the mortgage. If you drop the price from the seller's point of view, if they drop a price $10,000 on a $300,000 house, they're holding, this takes time and money just to maintain the property and taxes, so they might just say, oh, screw it, I'll just, reduce my price by $10,000, here, go on, we'll make a deal. So, timing and everything. And if you have any questions, please, on the comments and so on, I try to respond. I work for Lions Team Realty in Moneta, Virginia. I live in Buchanan, Virginia. My name is Paul Smyers. There's a beautiful area around here, Blue Ridge Parkway, and I hope to see you in some of my other videos and watch some of my other ones about homesteading and so on. And I'm not a farmer, okay? Just to get it clear, a homestead is just basically a property where you have your home, and typically we call a homestead something that there's somewhere besides just a suburb where you just mow the lawn now and then, or maybe you have someone mow the lawn, and that's it. It's a homestead is an operating thing where typically there's some machinery and tools and things, and maybe a well and a septic and maybe some fencing and maybe even the pets. It's a different kind of an operation, a little bit more self-sufficient than a typical suburb type of life. And their homesteading can go all the way to total independent living, and that's very difficult to do these days because life has changed over the years. But there's still a lot of people interested in getting off grid a little bit, or getting a little out of the rural area where it's a lot more peaceful to live, and it's generally a lot cheaper as well. So thanks again for listening, and hope to see you in some of my other videos.